Hi, welcome to this week's episode. I was going to say version. I don't know why. My brain isn't working this morning. This week's episode of the Wellbeing Show. We have some great guests, Annie and Izzie, who will introduce themselves in a second. Just the usual blurb at the beginning of the show. It's pre-recorded as though it's live, so it may look live, but if you call me on the number I'm just about to give you, I may be out doing something social rather than actually being available for a call, so be aware of that. If you've got any questions, do drop me a WhatsApp 07506 319 745. I'm sure Izzie and Annie will, after they explain what they do, we'll give you some contact details for their organisation as well. We'd love to hear from you if you've got questions or queries. So do feel free to get with the caveat that this is. Okay. All right. So enough from me. Annie, Izzie, who wants to say hi first?
I'll say hello.
Great.
So hi Noel, my name's Izzie. I am one of the founders of FLAARE, which I'm really excited to speak with you about today. And for the interest of those on this podcast, Noel and I met at yoga.
Yeah, we did. And she's still talking to me. So there you go. That's a courageous young woman, I think, if nothing else. Thick-skinned at the very least. Annie, tell us about you.
Hi everyone, I'm Annie. I'm co-founder of FLAARE with Izzie, and we've known each other our whole lives. Family friends, our parents are besties. So yeah.
So you were destined to be besties. You didn't have much of a choice. That was it. You two, be friends. End of story. That's it. Get on with it.
Need someone to keep me on track.
Yeah, good. I say, well, that's never going to happen, right, Izzie? So we'll accept that.
She tries.
So FLAARE is, I remember I discovered it, and I should sort of own my agenda here. I've got a background as a youth worker and a play worker, and FLAARE resonated with my heart when Izzie told me about it over a coffee after a yoga session. And FLAARE is an organisation that you both founded that works with very marginalised at-risk children, at risk of coming into contact with the criminal justice system, at risk of life failure, at risk of probably quite a lot of them in care proceedings, maybe at risk of being taken into care, maybe at risk of being sectioned in hospital, sort of multiple, certainly facing a lot of challenges in life. And kids who are in PRUs, which for people who don't know are pupil referral units, that exist to help, quite challenged and troubled children. Is that an accurate description of the sort of client base, as it were?
Yeah, so PRU is sort of a school for kids who've been excluded from mainstream school, those who don't know. But we work in PRUs, we work in youth hubs, in North London at the moment, always looking to expand and do more elsewhere. But yeah, it's quite a, as you said, underrepresented group.
So, I'm going to ask a sort of quite a blunt question of both of you. Is that your background? Is that your experience as kids yourself? Were you in PRUs or not?
No. It's a good question, but I think actually for us, it would be wrong to say anything other than probably quite the opposite. However, with some context that goes alongside the fact that I can speak for both of us from a factual perspective, that both of us have been really lucky in terms of our kind of educations and upbringing. We've come from loving, straightforward families in that sense. That being said, we have Annie spoke about our parents knowing one another already. We have both been brought up by parents who've been very engaged with volunteering and working with actually young people with disabilities for that's how our parents kind of came to know each other well, through volunteering on a Disabled Kids Week holiday, which Annie and I now are a part of as well, and I actually ran this year. My parents specifically both work for the NHS. So my dad's a GP and my mum is a palliative care nurse. So when I graduated and moved to London, it was really like clear and quick to me that I'd start doing lots of volunteering, and I've always done that through my whole life. So I think where FLAARE isn't necessarily something that we haven't been in pupil referral units, for example. We've been very much kind of working with young people from all sorts of backgrounds for our whole lives. And I can let Annie talk a bit more about that. And you actually spoke about you've been involved with refugees and groups such as those. And I've lived and worked in the refugee camps in Calais, not for, you know, ages, for kind of 6 weeks at a time, a month at a time tops. But I think there's just been a lot of like volunteering and just being a part of and standing with underrepresented communities that has been a big feature of both of our lives.
I mean, you come across to me, and just listening to you now, as somebody who sort of recognises has gratitude for what life has given you, but also has a sense in which you want to pay that forward in that rather obnoxious modern terminology. Sort of, I think volunteerism is something I prefer, to be honest, but paying it forward, you know, giving back because you've been granted something that, and you can recognise that that's
Totally. I think one of the big things for me is like I'm no different from anybody else. It's just so happens that I've been given the tools to open certain doors, and there are so many young people who haven't been, and therefore haven't been able to open those doors. And so what is important to me is that I'm able to use my skills and basically the investment in me as a human being to create space for other people.
Yeah. Well said, thank you. Annie, what would you sort of like to say about that?
Yeah, I think obviously Izzie has said a fair bit about like the volunteering and the work that we do. The week that she's talking about actually is where my parents met. So again, kind of ingrained in me and my family and my siblings and everything. And I think it's that idea of like we have skills that we can give to other people, that we can give to young people. And I do think it's just a really challenging world for young people right now. So particularly, I mean, it's always tough to be young and to grow up and to be going through puberty and everything is difficult enough. But I think it's particularly tough right now for young people. There's so much going on in the world that they have to grapple with. And if we can make that easier for them, if we can help them in any way, then I feel like that's something I want to be doing. For sure.
I mean, I would agree. I mean, I sort of coming from my perspective as not a young person, let's say, but I have nothing but admiration for young people these days. Because say kids, anybody under 30 to me is a kid. Sorry about that, but I'm just really old-fashioned. But young people, young adults, kids themselves, impress the hell out of me, actually, to be honest. Really do. I'm sort of aware of the pressures on youth and growing up in the world at the moment. So like some simple facts, for example, salaries for young people haven't even recovered from the 2008 financial crisis. I mean, it's insane. I mean, like you go into the jobs market and you're going to be earning less than your peers were in 2007.
Yeah.
Like what sort of world is that?
We had a stat the other day. Sorry, we had a stat the other day that 90% of graduates are failing to even get interviews.
Yeah,
like it's that bad in terms of the opportunity for young people out there, and that's graduates.
Yeah,
so that's the other. That's not even thinking about young people who've been in pupil referral units, and I think that's another big thing. Like, how are we creating a society which values everybody's skills and provides different avenues?
Yeah. I mean, I'll sort of own my stuff. I come from a highly dysfunctional childhood myself, with lots of trauma and violence and alcoholism and all that sort of stuff. But I was very successful at school, and it saved my ass, to be honest. Quite frankly, education was the route out of that stuff for me, and I was the first person in my family to go to university. I'd got a postgraduate qualification. I'm a great fan of a skills-based, tools-based approach to life, because then again, it's possible to overcome things if you have an appropriate skill set. I'm also intrigued by, because my experience, and I wonder if you've got some things to say about this. My experience was that, you know, if I'd stayed in my own, sorry about the thumbs up. I don't know how to turn this setting off on my computer, and it just sort of copies my, where is it? Is there so my experience was I had to navigate, if you like, cultural shifts in my life. As I grew and developed, I needed to sort of learn how to operate in different cultures to the one that I'd grown up in truth. So it was really important to me to have sort of guides along that so I could really understand, because I did feel like going to university for me was a really strange experience, because the people I met had come from massively different backgrounds to me. And although there are lots of nice people, I needed specific help and guidance along that route. Does that resonate in terms of what you've been doing with young people and your own experiences?
Yeah,
for sure. I think obviously code switching is like a huge part of life as you interact with like different parts of the same society that are different to what you've grown up with. And I think a lot of our young people don't even realize that they are doing it when they are doing it, and how to make that work for them. And that's something that, like, I think what we really want to instill with young people is like an entrepreneurial mindset as well, because that feels like opening what they can do and the skills they already have got, which many of them already are really amazing.
Let's come back to that in a second, because I think that's really crucial, sort of working with people and reframing experience to understand how successful you are as a survivor is like a really important thing. I want to come back to code switching, if you don't mind, because it's a very particular term, which I think I understand, but people may not. Can you tell me more about code switching and what that means?
So code switching is adapting not just how you talk, but how you act, how you behave, how you hold yourself, depending on the situation that you're in and the people that you're interacting with. So often people will code switch between their family life and their school life, maybe work again. Lots of times code switching is also along racial and class difference. So there's often language, like sort of specialties between different groups of people, and people know that not everyone's going to understand what they're saying if they talk like that, or they're going to be perceived a certain way when they talk like that or act like that. So they change themselves to fit the mold of what the world expects them or wants them to look like.
Yeah. And it's interesting, again, if I reflect on my own growth and development, because I was very attracted to theatre when I was younger. It's another one of the arts were really important to me. But also what it did was, on reflection, was give me a set of tools where I could do that code switching much more comfortably than, say, my peers, because I was learning to play different roles, as it were. So from a psychological therapy, I call it sort of role repertoire, having a sort of a range of roles that you can adapt to. But code switching is also, I think, you know, a really good term and something that people can think about, because change doesn't just involve getting new ideas. It means issues around who you are as a person, and also, and again, coming back to some of the young people that you might work with, how they might be interpreting me, for example. I remember, so I had some guests on who do this amazing project where they have guys who come up from the streets, as it were, who act as mentors to other guys at risk, and who may also be perpetrators as well themselves. And so I was innocently and naively asking them to talk about their feelings on this show. Their mentors having to step in and go, "That's a little bit too soon, Noel. Let's talk in a different way about this." And just understanding that, you know, like in that context, the code or the meaning, so code is another word for meaning, the meaning of being vulnerable is something. Understanding that. And certainly I remember that from my own childhood, that if I was too vulnerable and open, that would incite attack. And so there were certain risk factors. How do you, I mean, I know you both have a background in this, and there's like so just to bludgeon that point home, that about code switching is having safe people that you can form relationships with, that are different to your own culture, inherited culture, whether that be gender, race, or socioeconomic, social circumstances, having safe people that can guide you along that process and understand, like you both do, that there's more at stake than just learning a curriculum. But actual real change and social progression and social movement involves understanding all the unconscious cues that people have. Yeah. Is that reasonable to say?
Yeah. And I think, I mean, I don't know if there's a kind of next question where you want to discuss this further, but if we talk about the founding of FLAARE, as it were, am I okay to talk about that?
Go for it.
To link to this, I think, so one of the, as I said, that I've always done a huge amount of volunteering. I have parents who work in the public sector. I have a big role model in my father, whose family came from Goa. His parents came from Goa. So he always had a really kind of hardworking mindset, that kind of, I mean, I don't know if you can say this, but that kind of real Asian work ethic that he had from having seen that experience through his family was really interesting in terms of like, okay, I have a set of values and a work ethic. When I was volunteering on this community farm in Waterloo, was working with young people from a pupil referral unit, meanwhile doing a corporate job where we looked a lot at diversity and inclusion and hiring graduates and apprentices. Now, what became extremely clear is that these young people who we were working with from a pupil referral unit on a community farm were amazing. They had so much to offer. They had loads to say. They were interested in the world, but their view of the world was completely different from that even that was assumed by the corporates who were looking to hire for their diversity and inclusion strategy. So actually a lot of like the founding of FLAARE was around, how do we create something that provides tangible opportunities that talk to young people in a way that engages them, i.e. money is their language. Therefore, often we see young people going and joining gangs, dealing drugs, getting involved with knife crime. Okay, they therefore aren't that interested right now in applying to an apprenticeship to work at a large corporate, because a 9 to 5 in the city, which has no relation to the environments that they've been brought up in, is not appealing. So we can't patronize them to suggest that if that's not what they want to do, they're then not worthy of having a strong future and strong career. So what FLAARE became about is, okay, how can we meet these young people where they're at? How can we talk to them in their language, i.e. use some code switching ourselves so that we're still able to dress up a future opportunity to develop yourself, to think about what your skills and talents are, and to use that in a meaningful way. But how can we do that in a way that talks to you, i.e. pulling in cool, creative local businesses, founders, entrepreneurs, using social media to run and launch our programs, partnering with fashion brands, creating a product or a service that young people can sell, paying young people. All of these things come into our programs, because what we're not saying is actually, instead of, bunking school, you should be going to do your maths GCSE because you need to apply for X and Y, Z diversity program. No, what we're saying is you actually have a huge amount of skills and talents within the remits that you're interested in, but let's talk to you in that language and figure out what we can do to build up your skills and your exposure to other role models.
Yeah. So, Annie, what would you say about meeting people where they are? Is it important to do that? And how do you understand it?
100%. I think also what I think is the most important for the young people that we work with is gaining their trust. And I think that you can't do that if you don't meet them where they're at. So, and you also can't do that without some level of persistence and consistency, which I think oftentimes they don't have. So it does take a while. for young people to trust new people. I completely understand that. So I think it's one of those things where it's like, for us, being present and understanding that we can't just make assumptions about them or about their background or about what they have going on in their lives, and we can't make assumptions about the skills they do or don't have. So we need to meet them where they are, and then once we do that and we gain their trust, then we can build, like you said, those code switching skills. We can build entrepreneurial skills. We can build their aspirations and what they view as success. But you can't start by saying, okay, well, you guys need to value this.
Yeah,
you need
too
to
high.
you need to want to
The
be.
functioning is too high, isn't it? I mean, it sounds like, and I'm putting words into your mouth, so please tell me to shut up if I am, but it sounds like a core of the work is forming those relationships first. And, you know, so that you're safe with them, they're safe with you, and that you can communicate, well, I respect and understand, I have some insight into where you're coming from. And with that, then people can be encouraged to come and have a bit of respect for you, and maybe then trust that the journey that you've got to offer is reasonable and makes sense. I'm really intrigued by this idea of money. It's not something that people are realistic about, I think, Izzie, in the lives of marginalized young people and what motivates them to do what they do. And people don't understand the impact of poverty. They really don't, unless you're in it, seriously.
No.
And I remember in my work, I told you about my work. I want to come to some anthropological questions with you, Annie, as well, because I'm just intrigued by some of these questions. There's some anthropological, political questions about change.
Yeah.
Different cultures, and I really want to draw that out of you a little bit. But just thinking about like the work I did in Kids Company, for example, one of the things that the organization offered was cash to children.
Yeah.
Who were responsible for bringing money into their highly dysfunctional homes. Otherwise, their siblings didn't eat. Otherwise, you know, that was expected of them. And in a culture, in a setting where literally getting a bag of marijuana was cheaper than getting a loaf of bread. Seriously. And people just don't get that, just how that operates and the pressures on people. And the centres that Kids Company operated, whatever you think about the organisation, they were hated by the local gang leaders universally because they couldn't recruit kids anymore, because we met those financial needs and those food needs for people, and so they weren't going to gangs, they were coming to those centres. And I think people don't understand that. I'm really interested in how you got to an understanding of that and why you chose an entrepreneurial model, which, to be honest, I'm really all for being an entrepreneur myself.
I think, well, I suppose, we're talking about money, but also we're talking about, therefore, what you can offer that is a valuable alternative to making money. So if you're saying, okay, you're a young person and you don't have much money, you've been brought up in poverty, I think it is patronizing to assume that you're not going to fall into gang violence and drug dealing if that is your only route of making money. So therefore, we need to be really, really clear with ourselves that we are being patronizing, unless by suggesting that that's the wrong thing for a young person to do, unless we are providing a viable, engaging and appealing alternative that works. I feel really strongly about that, because I think it's so easy for, otherwise, like you say, the kind of the language in society to be very discriminatory and siloed, and these people who are doing these illegal things, but that's with a whole experience which is totally different from the way that this is being viewed within the general experience of more people in society who are not living in poverty. And I think, therefore, why entrepreneurship? Well, again, when I'm working with, and have been working with, young people from urban backgrounds, they are really interested, and they've got really got their ears to the ground in terms of like modern culture and music and creativity and doing tangible things to sort of use their hands to make I don't know, like necklaces or bracelets or fashioned t-shirts. The whole thing with, I guess, like Depop, if you think about people like selling their clothes, all of this kind of like small scale commerce that enables people to buy and sell from each other but also pulls on creativity, it became quite clear that this was something that the young people who I was working with were really interested in and could talk about. But then you're also thinking their role models are trap artists and grime and YouTube and all of the stuff that they're watching online, and those people are all driving crazy cars and have enormous houses. So then you're like, okay, well, how can you marry the two? That's about giving you a viable alternative to other things that you might come to do. And business entrepreneurship, being able to, you know, use your own skills, not have to be limited by school, for example. If you've been kicked out of school, that's probably not something you're super interested in. And then, okay, we can enable you to make money, or at least take the skills away that are gonna help you do that on your terms. Because that's the other thing. A lot of this is about people wanting to be able to own and control the terms of how they earn.
And widen the network of experience. One of the things that's interesting for me is this whole thing about survival and that energy for survival, which is part of entrepreneurship as well. And thinking in the business culture of the UK, for example, the UK is quite an unusual business culture in that I think it's something like 40% of businesses are SMEs in the UK, and it's very high in comparison to other countries around the world. And we've always been a nation of shopkeepers is the sort of usual thing. And so actually those systems and structures already exist, and it's a business model that exists. So bringing in new small businesses is, I think, just eminently sensible because the market's there and it's not like you're having to plow a furrow. But also, and again, I think for me, I take this sort of perspective. What I see these young people doing is they're coming from a very pro-social basis, which it may seem really strange because they're doing very antisocial activities. But they're trying to survive, which is a very pro-social thing. And actually shifting that energy into something that is perceived by society as much more beneficial is absolutely a win-win situation, which is why I like this entrepreneurial model, because actually what you're doing, it seems to me, is using what they are doing anyway, but just shifting the focus. And so they no longer get the negative consequences from society, the sanctions, but it's essentially the same set of skills. I mean, it may sound crazy if people don't know this stuff, but I work in youth. This is a normal conversation. It's like, how do we shift away from sort of being a drug dealer to being a business person? Is like absolutely the way to do it, right?
And if you think about, like, I mean, at the end of the day, if you think about a drug dealer, they've got all the skills of a high-class businessman. They've got a really good understanding of supply and demand. They've probably got strong stakeholder management. They've got communication. The difference is, and I heard this actually broken down really well by a teacher to a kid in a pupil referral unit, is the difference between all of that is what she actually said verbatim was, but whatever his name was, do you really want to be shotting on Christmas Day? And that was the point. It's like,
that's
you can
right.
do this, but if you go down this route, like, there is a ceiling. I've had a long conversation with a young person before about, they were like, well, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna have a massive car. And I was like, okay, cool. And they were like, well, I'm gonna steal a car, but actually that, like, my man them are gonna steal the car. And I was like, okay, fine, but then where are you gonna put the car? Because you can't just have a stolen car, because that you're gonna get arrested. And they were like, well, no, but like the man them are gonna do that. And we were like, okay, cool. but how are you going to get them to do it? And he was like, well, we'll pay them. And we were like, well, how are you going to pay them? And then he was like, well, I'm going to pay them because I'm already going to have some money, and then they're going to take the car and they're going to like transfer it, and then they're going to take it to Italy, and then it won't be traceable. And we were like, well, how are you going to get it there? Like, it doesn't have any documents. And we kind of went through this whole thing, and then they were like, oh yeah, okay, should we talk about like this program?
Yeah, should we talk about making a t-shirt instead?
Because it's like, oh, okay, exactly, because oh wait, maybe this won't work. But I think it's about like breaking it down in that language, and also having like role models and change makers who are part of the community. And I think that's the other power of entrepreneurship, that it can be local, that we're not saying, right, you need to aspire to be the next, you know, like whoever big famous rapper. We're not saying, oh, these people are very much outside of your experience. We're saying these are local businesses, shopkeepers, local like fashion brands who now use social media. I think that's another way of actually really opening access. But getting young people inspired within the communities that they live in also is win-win in terms of the impact on that community.
Yeah, well, it's asset-based community development, which we can talk about. But before we get to, I mean, actually may connect to the sort of more anthropological questions, Annie. So there are, I guess, for you as an anthropologist, because that's what you trained as, some interesting conversations here around different cultures and maintaining cultural integrity, but also supporting change, which is, I guess, one of the core anthropological questions. You know, how do you respect but also recognize there are problems as well?
Yeah, and I think what you said actually about it, most of these young people's actions being pro-social, is really interesting because what I would say about,
let me clarify what I mean by that. What I'm saying is we're all human beings and we're all programmed in the same way, but society messes some of us up more than others. Yeah, but essentially we're the same. We're engaged in the same thing, which is just trying to get on in life, meet our basic needs, meet our social and cultural needs. But in some of those behaviors are valued negatively and some of them are valued positively. That's what I mean. Does that make sense, Annie?
Yeah. What I was going to say was, I think it's very accurate for our young people, that, and also I think they are, like, a lot of what they do is about their community and about their family and their friends. And even though it may be, like you said, in behavior that is criminalized or behavior that is even demonized in some ways, like, what they're doing is they're acting in the best way that they can for their family and their community and their friends and what they know of. And I think young people are so much more,
to understand that gang might be family for some people.
Yeah.
Right. So the word,
and they're so much more like astute and switched on than I think a lot of adults give them credit for. And they know when things are difficult, they know what they can and can't do. And they know sometimes that what they're doing is, you know, not what they should be doing, but what is going to make something happen. So I think in my background of anthropology, this idea about societal change, you know, anthropology is a very bottom-up view of things, working with community, understanding community, and different communities have so many different things going on all the time, and you can't ever fully know someone else's experience, but you can interact with them, and it's that kind of on an individual basis. If you manage to have a conversation like Izzie did with that one young person and change their mindset just a little bit, that's then going to ripple out to the rest of, when his friends are going to say to him, or, oh, this, that, the other, that then also changes. And the young people that we've worked with, we're hoping that ripple effect will work. And the next stage of what we're doing is looking at youth work in particular. And the youth workers are incredible. And what they do is they interact with so many young people. And that, you know, can have a much wider impact than we can as two individuals.
We'll talk about your training program just a second. We've got about 5 minutes left before Izzie needs to go off and be a corporate lady, and we'll let her go and do.
Probably go. We can go till 11. It's fine.
Can you? Okay, all right. Thank you. We'll get to the training and specific products that you're doing, because I think this model of cascading out hub and spoke, some people call it, but the training model is really fantastic and the way to go. It definitely is. But just thinking about, because you said we hope what it does is cascade. Well, I know it does. And there's a thing called asset-based community development, which is a very evidence-based approach to community development, which has been around for donkey's years. And very roughly or very quickly, to describe it to people listening, if you imagine a set of houses on a street, like 10 houses in which there's the usual level of types of problems that families might have in one house. There's intimate partner violence in one house, there's addiction in one house, there's criminality, etc., etc., etc. Now, there's two ways of thinking of fixing that issue. One is the model which removes the person from the problem, puts them somewhere else, fixes them, and then they are fine over there, but they never go back. All that does, though, the evidence shows that if you do it that way, if you do it from a top-down approach, if you like, what you're left with is the dysfunction, not the function. You've just made that street worse. You may have made that individual better, but you've made that street worse. Whereas if you take an asset-based approach, what you do is you have change in the street. And then what that does is two things. One is that you've helped an individual, but then they model change to the other people within the dysfunction. And they make it possible to understand. It's exactly the same in corporate land. When you're talking about doing mental health work in corporate sphere, you're not talking about taking people out of the workplace. You're talking about providing services within the workplace, and then other workers can see, oh, I've got a compassionate employer who helps people. I'll tell them about my difficulties. Other people, you reduce the level of distress and problems, etc., etc. So asset-based approaches, which is what I think you're doing, I think that's reasonable for me to call that. There's a lot of evidence that that works, and it is the only thing that works, to be honest.
And I think actually that's we talk a lot about community and collaboration, but ultimately what we're thinking about is prevention. And how do you prevent young people from ending up? How do we as FLAARE create the environment for us not to be needed as an organization? Like, that should be the end goal, right? We shouldn't need a FLAARE. We shouldn't need a Prince's Trust. We shouldn't need, obviously they could go and keep doing some of the amazing things they should be doing, but your utopia would be where there are no young people who are struggling to find opportunities that engage them in a safe, meaningful, and legal way in society. So like, actually we need to think about role models and the local community in order to make that happen and embed that change. And that's also why Annie and I don't stand at the front of our programs. Like, our programs aren't me and Annie, we make them happen, and we build really trusting relationships with the young people on a small scale. But if we're thinking about scalability, this is about how we as FLAARE position individuals within local businesses and the community and incredible role models to be the change makers for young people, to raise ambitions and aspirations. And that's what this is about. Because I think, going back to what you asked us earlier, we've had amazing people in our lives who've raised our ambitions and made us be able to realize our skills and talents. And that's what we're looking to get other people to do on behalf of all of the young people, and indeed youth workers who FLAARE work with.
And as you're talking, I'm thinking of a guy called Eric, who is my English teacher at school, who did exactly that. And as a very disturbed, upset young man who was a bit lost and didn't know which way to go with all this really sort of serious, heavy shit that I had to deal with, he was great. He was just nice, kind, and he had a laugh with me. He made everything okay. And he encouraged aspects of my functioning, such as my brain. He saw that I had one. He saw I got into theatre. He saw I liked theatre and English and reading plays, and I felt safe doing that. So he was great. Having that, I can testify myself, and we know it works. In that context, the next step has been for you to sort of go, well, we know this works. How do we scale it up? And so you've now you're moving into training youth workers, I think. Is that right? That's the focus at the moment. So tell me about, Annie, do you want to tell me about that
Sure.
model and why you want to go that direction?
Yeah, so I think we've been really lucky to work in youth hubs most recently, and with some amazing youth workers. So youth work is kind of an umbrella term, covers a lot of different job functions, a lot of different types of work. Could be for the council, could be in schools, could be for organizations and charities. But what we felt, having done the work in a youth hub with a group of youth workers, was that because of current, monetary problems typically, and time constraints and capacity of teams, youth workers don't feel like they can really push for what they want to do, and they don't have the capacity or the skills to run a lot of things that they want to be running. So we spoke to our friends, our youth workers, and they were sort of saying, we don't feel like we're listened to, we don't feel like we're valued in society. People think we're just babysitters.
Yeah.
But actually what we do every day is very complex problem solving, amazing interpersonal skills, like dealing with incredibly challenging situations every single day for hours at a time with hundreds of young people is not something anybody can do. But youth workers aren't valued in society, and also they're not being given personal and professional development in many cases.
Yeah.
So we were thinking, how can we support these youth workers who do all this amazing work so that they can run their own programs, so they can run FLAARE programs, so that they can also feel as though they're being valued and feel as though they're being supported by someone, because for a lot of them, they don't feel that. They feel as if they're just glorified babysitters.
Yeah.
That's how they're perceived, even though that's totally inaccurate to what they're doing. So that's how we kind of came about, through conversations with our youth workers, and hearing what they had to say about that, and recognizing that what the work they do is powerful and really important, but they, need more help. They need more support. They need more professional development. And I think many people outside of the youth workspace don't see it as a career, as a trajectory.
Yes.
So we were like, how can we support that this is a valuable and viable career and trajectory for young people? Because oftentimes youth workers are people who have worked or have been in those situations and communities themselves, which is why they can understand and connect to the young people the best.
Yeah, I think of them, we used to call them the membranes in Kids Company. They're the vehicle by which a marginalized young person can pass through into other aspects of society. Crucial people, absolutely crucial people.
Exactly. And therefore it's so important how they show up, right? And what we are doing to invest in their ability to show up as the best membranes that they can be.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of the strategy that we're looking at with youth workers, alongside still quick plug, alongside still looking to support and work with councils to run our FLAARE programs in their spaces.
Right.
So that we kind of got two
what I want to suggest is we need to sort of finish there, because you've got a call to make, I know. And I just want people to acknowledge that both of these wonderful people have got to go and do their jobs. They've taken time out of their jobs and they run FLAARE sort of in their spare time. Highly committed individuals that our country needs a lot of, to be honest. And I'm very, very grateful that you come on and shared with me today. Really inspiring stuff. Will just give us the website quickly.
So it's FLAARE, FLAARE.org.uk.
So that's the point of contact. And the types of services: consultancy, training, direct support to young people at risk. People should get in touch. You've got my contact details. But what I propose to do, because I think there's a lot more to talk about, so I propose to go in, invite you back on. I'll get my team to get hold of you, bring you back on. I want to talk about the types of training you're doing and what the components are, so that we can really sort of dive into it a bit more deeply, because that's given us an overview of what you do, but I think it's so crucial stuff that you're doing. Leave you there for now. I'm going to say goodbye to people. You two stay there. I'm going to say goodbye to people. I hope you've sort of been inspired as much as I have. The world is okay, despite the fact there's a lot of rubbish stuff going on with people like Izzie and Annie in it. You know, it's definitely okay. And there are solutions in all the nonsense. Really grateful to have had you both on. I shall see you all at the next show, and goodbye for now.